Hey everyone, this is Peter Zablocki, the host of the Daily History Shorts podcast. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. If this is your first time stopping by, I hope you stick around and return tomorrow for more fun history. And if you enjoy these Friday conversation series, you can always find the entire backlog of conversations with historians, authors, Pulitzer Prize winners, and much more under the Conversations tab on our website at www.historyshortspodcast.com.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Today's conversation is proudly brought to you by The Collector, your destination for captivating stories that teach, inform, and inspire millions of readers every day. From ancient history to today's defining moments, from philosophy and art to exclusive interviews, discover more at thecollector.com. Today, I am honored to sit down with one of America's most influential filmmakers of all time, Mr. Ken Burns. For over 4 decades, Ken has brought our nation's past to life through groundbreaking documentaries like the Civil War, jazz, the Dust Bowl, and the U.S. and the Holocaust, earning him countless awards and a place in the hearts of history enthusiasts everywhere. His work doesn't just recount events, it challenges us to confront the complexities, contradictions, and enduring lessons of the American story. In this episode, we'll delve into Ken's creative process, from selecting untold narratives to the art of editing that breathes emotion into archives. We'll reflect on how his films navigate America's ideals versus its realities, and we'll get an exclusive look at his upcoming 6-part series, The American Revolution, set to premiere on PBS on November 16th, 2025. As we approach the 250th anniversary of our nation's founding struggle, what better time to examine the fragility of democracy, the voices often overlooked in history, and the parallels to our world today? Ken, welcome to History Shorts.
It is my pleasure.
So what started your journey toward your passion for history and storytelling? Was there like an aha moment, or did you feel like your whole life you were working towards this moment?
It's a combination, Peter. You know, I there's never a moment when I haven't been in some ways possessed by American history, though the last time I took an American history course that is to be formally taught was 11th grade in high school, where they make you take it, and everybody else was being dragged kicking and screaming to that. But all my life I'd been aware of it. My younger brother read novels. I read encyclopedias. I was sort of interested in all of that. My mom was sick. Our mom was sick with cancer for all of my life and died just before my 12th birthday when I was 11. A few months after that, when I was 12, my dad, who had a strict curfew, would let me stay up really late with him to watch old movies. And I saw my dad cry for the first time, not during my mom's illness, not at her death, not at the impossibly sad funeral. And I realized that with this old movie that it had provided him a kind of emotional safe haven. And so right then and there at 12, I said, I'm going to be a filmmaker. And
Wow.
that meant Howard Hawks or Alfred Hitchcock or,
John Ford,
whatever it might be. And I ended up going to Hampshire College when its second year of being open in 1971. And Amherst, Massachusetts, wonderful experimental college, still there, still wonderful, still great. All my teachers were social documentary still photographers. So all of a sudden my father had been an amateur still photographer and an anthropologist, professional one. So all of a sudden I was switching from being, the Hollywood ideal to like a documentary one. And then I had an opportunity in my last year at Hampshire to make a film on history. And then that's it. It's like everything lined up and all of it is completely untrained and untutored. I mean, the last history course I took in college was Russian history. So, I mean, but I'd always been possessed by our story. And it just seems so amazing that 54 years later from when I entered Hampshire, 50 years from when I graduated, that I would be able to go back to the founding and try to make some sense of it.
Your films frequently explore America's contradictions, ideals versus realities, progress amid division. What draws you to these specific tensions in your topics, and how do you navigate portraying them in a way that without it imposing a singular narrative?
I think that's a wonderful question. Life isn't tidy. It doesn't fit into the binary systems that are media culture, one and a zero, our political culture, red state, blue state, or, whatever it might be wants things to fit into. Stories are complicated. In fact, I have in my editing room a neon sign, lowercase cursive, that says it's complicated. Because filmmakers, when a scene is working, you don't want to touch it, but we touch it all the time. We mess with it, we destabilize it, we make it less perfect because we're more faithful to what's going on, and what's going on inevitably in human behavior is contradictory. George Washington is deeply flawed, rash, and makes terrible tactical decisions on the battlefield, one after another. And yet, without him, we don't have a country. He's the only person you can say that about. Without him, we do not have a country, period, full stop. So I want to know that. This is what we know about ourselves, about the people we love. And somehow we've decided that in our politics and in our views of history that it has to be one thing or the other. It's not looking for complications. They're always there. I remember working on my jazz series that trumpeter and composer Wynton Marsalis said, sometimes a thing and the opposite of a thing are true at the same time. And so I think we have to be able to, as we do in our own ordinary life with the people we love, with our friends, with our colleagues, to be able to understand this undertow that the opposite could also be true about somebody. Heroism, you take a good example, is heroism, which we now in our infinitely narrow and superficial way assume is perfection, when in fact heroism, as we inherit from the Greeks, is a very complicated look, psychological look at a person's strengths and weaknesses. And it is the negotiation between those strengths and weaknesses, sometimes the war between them, that determines heroism. That is to say, Achilles has his heel and his hubris to go along with his great powers. And so what you want to do is call balls and strikes. If it's just a highlight film, then Babe Ruth is always going to hit a home run. If it's the real game, then he comes up only once every 9 times at bat, and he strikes out a lot. He's also hits a lot of home runs, and he's got a great personality, and that personality is complicated. So in that way, we've always just wanted to call balls and strikes in our telling of history, and inevitably you end up with a much more interesting, complex thing, because that middle infielder that's batting 185 is sometimes key to an entire game. And so our American Revolution is populated by all the big names, the bold-faced names, the Washingtons, the Jeffersons, the Patrick Henrys, the John Adams, the Benjamin Franklins. But it's also populated by dozens and dozens of so-called ordinary people, Americans from every stripe, Black, Native American, female, young teenagers, 14 years old, 10 years old, 15 years old, involved in the war effort, Germans, their wives, kings of England, their ministers, their big generals, their soldiers, Irish, Welsh, Scottish, and English, Spanish. All sorts of people are engaged in this story. And that's what you want to do. And the more characters you pile into it, the more you begin to understand that this isn't just some simple, superficial thing where, that's bloodless and gallant, but a very complex civil war. In a way, our civil war is not. Our civil war is more a sectional war. Lots of people died in this war. Civilians died in this war, particularly in South Carolina and New Jersey. It's really very powerful story. And I think when people get it, those big ideas that we pretend are the only thing about it, guys thinking big thoughts in Philadelphia, they're not diminished by telling the story. They're actually enhanced. It's even more inspiring when you understand that on April 19th, 1775 on Lexington Green, the chances of success were 0. And that somehow 6.5 years later in Yorktown in the fall, they're 100%. And I want to know how it got there.
You totally hit the nail on the head that when you look at history, it's the failures and the successes that drive it forward. And I always tell my students that at the beginning of every semester or school year, I say, look, I'm probably going to offend some of you, if not all of you, at some point this year. And I have to, because if I don't, that means I'm not teaching history correctly. History is not always pretty, but together, the sum of it is what brought us to this moment, you know?
That's exactly right. And that's a very poetic way. And when you think about successes and failures, we always want success. We always want good times, but we are defined more by our failures. Look at my story that I told you. What was involved in it? The death of my mother, who was sick every moment of my childhood until she died when I was 11 and 3/4. So without her death, I'm not here talking to you. My late father-in-law was an eminent psychologist, and he said, "Look what you do for a living. You wake the dead. You make Jackie Robinson and Abraham Lincoln come alive. Who do you think you're really trying to wake up?" Now, it's a very powerful thing to understand that the ways, and Bob Dylan said it, there's no success like failure, and failure is no success at all. And so I think what it is for us is to try to wean ourselves from the binary relationship to this, and accept a much more complex, nuanced view of human nature that doesn't serve a contemporary political agenda. It doesn't serve whatever other fashion of historiography that sometimes passes for our interpretations. It just is, and I hate to keep hitting this, calling balls and strikes.
Moving to the American Revolution, it's set to premiere in a short few months, I guess, a couple months. What inspired you to tackle this foundational story now at this moment, and especially at a time when debates over America's origins are so politically charged?
Yeah, well, there's no now because I decided to do this in December of 2015.
Oh, wow.
Barack Obama had 13 months to go in his presidency. There was a guy among a crowded field of Republican candidates that was not supposed to get out of the Iowa caucus the next month in January of 2016. So you have to keep your head down and just avoid all of the temptations to go neon sign. Isn't this so much like today? You just don't do that because it's always going to be that. Human nature doesn't change. The Bible says there's nothing new under the sun. But to answer your question, Peter, what's new under the sun is the creation of the United States. It's the most important event in all of world history since the birth of Christ. It is so influential. It's created revolutions all over the world, in Europe and in South America, in Asia, in Africa. It is at the heart of the human project that everybody before that moment were subject to authoritarian rule. And there were a few people living in 13 otherwise disunited colonies on the eastern seaboard who were suddenly this new thing, citizens. And pursuit of happiness does not mean go get rich, go get things. It means lifelong learning in a marketplace of ideas, because in order to earn the extraordinary gift of citizenship, you had to be virtuous. And to be virtuous, you had to be continually learning. And that way, the people saw it as an imperfect manifestation, the Constitution, but it was going to be to make a more perfect union, that we would be constantly working on it. And authoritarians want you to be superstitious. They don't want you to learn. They want to distance you from science. They will cut out research. They will do that sort of stuff because Jefferson says it a few phrases after The Pursuit of Happiness. He says, all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable. That's not complicated. It doesn't need, big parsing. What he means is that everybody heretofore in human experience has put up with the authoritarian boot, right? That they've been able to live in, to suffer while evils are sufferable. But we're creating this new thing that's going to require a little bit more energy. So as we work on the film over the course of nearly a decade, doing deep, deep research, where things come and go, and you go, if the film had come out in this date, this would resonate a lot. If it came out last year, a worry last fall, a worry that a German officer's wife had that Americans, she heard, ate cats. Well, that was a big thing in the leading up to the election. There's lots of things that will rhyme, as Mark Twain said. History doesn't repeat itself. Of course, it does not. No event has happened twice. But human nature doesn't change. The Bible says there's nothing new under the sun, Ecclesiastes, Old Testament. But we begin to see that every once in a while there's these rhymes, and human nature remains the same quantities of generosity and greed, of virtue and venality appear not only among people at any given time, but within them. I mean, one of the big characters in our film is Benedict Arnold. We know him as a traitor, end of story. We introduce him at the very first second, literally, of episode 2, and it isn't until episode 6 that he isn't anything but one of Washington's most trusted generals, the hero at Saratoga, the hero at Quebec, though that was a loss. And oh, by the way, Quebec, that's us trying to make Canada the 14th state, right? Oh, by the way, there's a continent-wide pandemic and a big argument about inoculation. And one of the great military decisions that George Washington makes, perhaps the best, one historian suggests in the film, is that he got the entire Continental Army inoculated. There's a total eclipse, as we had last year. It's big and it's noticed by everybody, and then they go on with the fighting just before the Battle of Monmouth Courthouse in New Jersey. It's always going to be there. And if you become obsessed with the contemporary moment, then you lose the opportunity to tell a story that allows the contemporary moment to come in. So the novelist Richard Powers said, "The best arguments in the world won't change a single person's point of view." And of course, Peter, all we do is argue. The only thing that can do that is a good story. So if you are disciplined enough to tell a good story, to just call the balls and strikes, then you have an opportunity to come into people's lives, their hearts, and be transformed. That's what our Civil War series was all about. That's what our series on World War II, which I vowed I'd never do after the Civil War, another film on war. But too many graduating high school seniors, you've met them, think we fought with the Germans against the Russians in the Second World War. And you go, what? You need to tell that story again. And then before the ink was dry on that film, I said, we're doing Vietnam. And as I suggested, before the ink was dry on Vietnam, I said, we're doing Revolution. Now, it provides a lot of challenges. No photographs, no newsreels, of course. How are you going to tell the story? And so part of the last decade has not just been getting the facts right. Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan once said, everybody's entitled to their own set of opinions, but they're not entitled to their own set of facts. So there are some facts that we know, and you have to get those right. And we've labored with many, more than 24 historians to get them right. Some of them appear on camera, some of them are behind the scenes, some are both. And to do our own research and discover characters that even they had not heard of yet, and to make them characters and to bring them alive off camera with a chorus of first-person voices whose cast list defies any. Maybe The Longest Day, the story of D-Day, has as good a cast list as we have, but I doubt it. And to follow Jeffrey Ward's extraordinary script and Peter Coyote's reading of the third-person narration, there are literally hundreds of first-person voices: Tom Hanks and Meryl Streep and Paul Giamatti and Claire Danes and Sir Kenneth Branagh and Damian Lewis, and I've named just 5 out of 50 or 60, to make the story come alive, to take the onus of the fact that there's no photographs, to take the onus of what we have of them are paintings, so they become cartoonish, that they dress with buckles on their shoes and they wear hose and they've got breeches and they got powder wigs. All of that means nothing. They are exactly like us. They are struggling with the same sorts of things that we are struggling with. We've always been divided, and the revolution proves that, and that the revolution is a civil war. Our civil war is a sectional war. It's just a great story, and I think, as you've alluded to with your excellent question, that at a time when we feel existentially threatened, or we understand that all of these things are in question and upheaval, it's good for everybody, regardless of your political beliefs, to go back and collect the origin story and to find out what actually happened. Because we've smothered the revolution in gallant, bloodless myth. The barnacles of sentimentality are firmly attached. But if you tell a story, those big ideas there, man, they are not diminished. They're just made bigger. And that's the thing I'm most excited about in sharing the film with our country. Everybody. I don't care. I've got my own politics, but I don't put it in my film. It's just, this is the story of us, both the lowercase, intimate, two-letter plural pronoun, and also the U.S.
It seems like you said you started in 2015. It's as if you were at the helm of an army. It's like you led an army for 10 years of
Yeah.
people to make this come to fruition.
It's exactly right. And there is a kind of generalship among my co-directors, Sarah Botstein and David Schmidt and myself, and some of our other staff to organize that. You'll see hundreds of names on the credits, so it's not an army, but maybe it's a battalion. And really, it's handmade. It's a platoon. It's maybe 24 people that are maybe less than that intimately make it. And we're doing our own research. We're not farming it out. We're incredibly interested in maps. They're hugely important. We've filmed for years and years and years people who reenact the battles, but not so that we can have them reenact a particular battle, but so we can get grist for our mill, so that we can have, what's it like with somebody in the snow warming their hands. So there's something gritty. What's it like to fight at night? What's it like for a cannon to go off out of a ship and you're in the hull? What's the sound that makes? So it's impressionistic. You don't see faces. You see the backs of people. You see the hands on the rifles. You see men going through mud. I mean, it's gritty. It's trying to remind people that this is not some sanitized weekend pursuit. And man, those reenactors, they earn my respect. Whether it's French, whether it's dressed as French soldiers, whether it's Spanish, whether it's African American, whether it's continental, whether it's militia, whether it's British, whether it's Native American, whether it's German, Hessian, they're all down to the underwear that you can't see. Incredibly precise. So we wanted to honor what they do by getting down with them. And sometimes they'd say, look, we don't want you interfering with what we're doing here. So we'd send a drone up way above and end up with this spectacular shot of people moving along a recently, harvested cornfield. We were patient, and we got people, Henry Knox pulling the cannon over the Berkshire Mountains from Ticonderoga to Boston to scare the British out of there back to Halifax, Nova Scotia. I mean, it's there and you feel it. There's a visceral sense. And usually in documentaries, you have a few talking soundtracks and music, and then you maybe have 10 or 15 tracks of effects. We have some places where you have hundreds of tracks. To make something come alive, you really have to will it to life. And those voices go a long way. I mean, when you have Meryl Streep reading Mercy Otis Warren, who is a historian and philosopher of the time. What? A woman? Yeah, she's the first historian and philosopher about the American Revolution. Or Claire Danes reading Abigail Adams, who may be the best writer of the period, and her husband, Paul Giamatti, reprising his role off camera. Josh Brolin is George Washington. Tom Hanks reads 10 different voices, and each one of them, it's like a grand slam home run. Kenneth Branagh, he's a British officer. He's a British minister. He's an ordinary Irish soldier. He's a French soldier. He's a German officer. He's an American officer. I mean, he can do anything. I could have had him do but the female parts. And then, there's so many people that are engaged in this struggle that you feel like it's no longer the history lesson. Here they are in Philadelphia. They're debating this. They did this. They left out that. They did this, and it's just a bunch of men in Philadelphia. It's much more complicated than that. And what happens is those men in Philadelphia and what they did become much more important when you find out what Betsy Ambler, 10 years old in 1775 from Yorktown, Virginia, who spends most of the war as a refugee from her own hometown and never gets to go back there as a result of the final battle of the Revolution, what she feels. And when Maya Hawke, daughter of Ethan Hawke, who plays Anthony Wayne, General Anthony Wayne in this, is reading it, you think it's her.
I wrote my master thesis back in college for my master's degree in American history on the Civil War aspect of American Revolution in New Jersey. And a lot of people don't realize, like you mentioned, this idea that the lines were so fluid at times. You had loyalists weren't necessarily the bad guys, depending on what time we're talking about. It was so fluid and changing all the time.
Well, let's talk about New Jersey, but let's first talk about loyalists, right? The tendency is to make them the bad guys, right? So the loyalists, what are they? They are essentially conservatives. They believe that, quite correctly, that the British constitutional monarchy is the best form of government on earth to date. And they're right. It's not like being subject to the French king, which is incredibly oppressive, or other regimes around the world. So we follow loyalists all the way through, and we're not judging them. We're just saying this is how you are. One of the most poignant scenes is when a loyalist at the Battle of Bennington kills his best friend growing up, who's coming up and has stuck him in the chest with his bayonet, and it's deflected off the bone. And he is, as John Peters, the loyalist, says, obliged to destroy him with his gun. I mean, that's the Civil War that and no worse than in South Carolina and New Jersey, in which there are more. You think about New Jersey, which has Trenton, which has Princeton and Monmouth Courthouse, big set piece battles. More German, Hessian, and British soldiers are killed in guerrilla actions than in anything else. After the British take New York, they offer a kind of amnesty. People flood to the British to sign up. But then the British are an occupying army, and they do what occupying armies do. They bust down houses, they steal all your hay, they eat your forage, they rape your wives. And there's all this instances of this. And then all of a sudden, it's not so much patriotic cause, but people are turning to the patriot side and ambushing them. It's like the Viet Cong in Vietnam. You say, we have this province pacified. And that's what they say. They use the term province. They send the word back to London. We've got it pacified. And then all of a sudden, it's not pacified. They have 18 garrisons. You probably know the number better than me, stretching from Fort Lee on the Hudson River all the way south of Trenton to Burlington, I think it is. And after we take Trenton and other stuff goes on, the British control in New Jersey just completely falls apart. It's an amazing thing. And in South Carolina, we estimate that at least a fifth of all battlefield deaths occurred in South Carolina, and not in big battles, but in these skirmishes that take place. And it's mainly Americans killing Americans. So you might have a British officer leading a loyalist brigade, but it's, at Kings Mountain, which is across the border in North Carolina, there's a Scottish general or officer for the British Army named Ferguson. He's killed. Everybody else is an American. So all the deaths at Kings Mountain, all the casualties are American casualties. And they're loyalists fighting patriots fighting, killing loyalists. And a lot of it is, people surrender, and then you take revenge, and maybe it's a neighbor that you didn't like, or, people get just executed. This is in our revolution, and it's not uncommon to say the moments there after they break through on D-Day and Saving Private Ryan, where you've got some Germans surrendering, but then there's that rash impulse, and boom, boom, two of them are dead. That's what war does, and our revolution is no different from that. And you'll feel that in this. You'll feel that viscerally. And that was our desire, to make it a palpable thing and to understand what a guerrilla fight it was.
Do you think the revolution itself should be celebrated primarily as a war, or war for independence, or as a social upheaval? And how does your series reconcile those two perspectives?
I don't think they need to be reconciled. I understand why there are differences. Benjamin Rush himself said the American war is over, but the American Revolution is still going on. And I would say that that's still true today. We're still, in pursuit of happiness. We're still looking for a more perfect union. And so what you have is a triumph of a particular set of arms, the first revolution ever dedicated to the idea that all men are created equal. But the ideas, they trump everything. As I say, this is the most important event in world history since the birth of Christ, and unbelievably influential. And I think every American, regardless of political stripe, should take pride at that and go back and relearn what it was we wanted. What was our problem with monarchy? What is the problem with monarchy? What is the problem with authoritarianism? What is the problem with the truth corrupted? What is the problem with conspiracy theories? What is the problem in not finding out what actually happens and happened then and is happening now? And this is the promise of America, is a kind of rigorous self-examination, because you can't be a citizen without asking yourself really important questions. And look at the example. Washington resigning his military commission and then resigning and not serving more than 2 terms. So he's giving an example to all of us that it's the office, not the person. There's no cult of personality, even though if he'd said as a general, I want to be dictator, they would have said, fine, you're the guy that's responsible for this. We accept it. Your excellency, whatever it is. He just wanted to be called president. He thought the highest office was citizen. This is great. And then when he's president, he retires that, he's telling us so many things about how Americans are configured at that point differently than anyone else on the world, and how influential those ideas have been throughout the world. And as our system is experiencing these unbelievable stresses, it's good to go back and collect the origin story in order to reinvigorate. Maybe we need a restart. Maybe we just need to go, oh, right, that's our story. We don't believe in this. We believe in that.
This is what it means to be an American.
This is what it means to be an American.
Your documentaries have shaped public understanding of history for decades. How do you feel about history being consumed in bite-sized formats today, like TikTok, Facebook Reels, versus long-term immersion of documentaries such as your own? Do you think that challenges historical integrity?
Yeah, I think it does to some extent. There's nothing wrong with getting something there used to be around the bicentennial, we're headed this year to the semi-quincentennial. There were these bicentennial minutes, right? And people learn stuff. That's okay. The problem is, what's the source of the information? Too often these things are corrupted by hearsay, conspiracy, somebody's made up facts and things like that. So who's the referee here, right? If you're calling balls and strikes, who's the umpire, right? So I think there's a problem. There's another thing too, which is all real meaning, Peter, accrues in duration. The relationships you care the most about, the work you're proudest of, has benefited from your sustained attention. There's no problem with enjoying a cat and a ball of yarn on YouTube. That's fine. Everybody likes that. But I would suggest that in a way, like a pearl, a pearl is an irritant. There's a grain of sand, and all of a sudden this stuff is created to sort of help with that irritant. And over time, imperceptibly, you build up this jewel. So what I've tried in my long form, and people say, oh, no one pays attention anymore. That's just not true. I mean, they used to say that the Civil War, baseball, jazz, the World War II, the national parks. But by the time we hit the Roosevelts in 2014, they weren't saying nobody watches this stuff anymore. It's either MTV or it's YouTube or whatever it is that has eroded the attention. People binge. I've got kids that'll spend the weekend and watch, 25 hours. I mean, that's longer than anything I've ever made. So when you have a tsunami of stuff breaking over your head, you curate and you go, I hear this is a good series, or I hear this guy's history is okay. Right. So you to do 12 hours, that's nothing. It'll be available streaming, or you can pace it out Sunday the 16th through Friday the 22nd. You can watch 2 hours a night and get the whole revolution that way, or you can binge it all in 12 straight hours, or you can divide it up, or you can have a watch party, or you can buy a DVD and a Blu-ray if any of your listeners know what that is, right? I think that all meaning accrues in duration. And so I've stuck to the long form when everyone told me you shouldn't do that. But I remember the old Aesop fable of the tortoise and the hare. PBS is like that too, After a while, the hare really fast gets tired and the tortoise just goes on by. And I think that you can't do a deep dive and have the nuanced understanding. Sometimes the irritants involved, the contradictory information, the stuff that's, as you say to your students, you might be upset with me, but you get a pearl at the end, Peter. You get a pearl.
I guess shifting gears, one stems off with something you said before when you said you used a drone for that nice shot, in the American Revolution. Thinking of all the technology, you've been doing this for decades. Is there any documentary series or story that you've told that you kind of would like to go back to using today's technology? Or
so here's the great thing about PBS. Like, I could have let's take the Vietnam War. It cost $30 million. It's 18 hours. It's 10 episodes. I could have walked into any streaming service back when I decided to do that, 2006, with my track record, or a premium cable, and they would have given me in one conversation all that money, right? Instead, I had to spend 10 of the 10 and a half years it took us to do it raising money constantly, right? From varieties of individuals, foundations, government stuff that's now been killed, all of that sort of stuff, right? Individuals of, corporations, Bank of America, unbelievable supporters. But they would not have given me 10 and a half years. They'd want it the next year or a year and a half. So what happens? What kind of Vietnam series, what kind of revolution gets done? It's superficial. It's bells and whistles. And so with technology, I've always been that way. We kept doing analog editing 10 years past all my colleagues had switched to computer editing because I didn't want the technological tail to wag the dog. I wanted the dog to continue to wag the tail. So yeah, it was a pain in the neck. And our poor interns who, in the beginning years of the 90s, they thought it was a badge of honor to learn the analog. By the end of the 90s, I switched to computer because I realized these poor kids, it's like somebody who wants to become a race car driver, me telling them, okay, let me show you how to shoe a horse, right? It just like after a while I said, okay, let's do the digital editing. But you wanted to make sure that you control. The same thing with shooting film. I continued shooting film another 10 years to 2009, 2010, because I just wanted a feel and a look and all of that. I had a big fight with George Lucas, and he proved to me. I went out to Industrial Light and he showed me I couldn't tell the difference between the digital and the film. And at that point I went, okay, but I still like the urgency of it. Like it costs more. That reel of film, like the digital stuff, you can just shoot and shoot and shoot and shoot, and then it shows. You can do it. You can shoot a million different ways, but with the film, you got to be careful and wait for the right light. Maybe the sun hasn't come up quite enough, and the other one you can just leave the thing rolling. Anyway, we held off on a lot of the bells and whistles and tricks of the technological trade in order that it didn't master us. This is the same way that we're going to be dealing with AI. We're not because we don't want that tail to wag the dog. It's so easy. It's a shortcut in so many ways, but we'd rather do it ourselves. It says of, I live in rural New Hampshire. It's cold up here. And when I first moved up here, I thought I was taking a vow of anonymity and poverty doing what I was doing. So I heated my house as best I could with wood, which meant you had the wood delivered, you chopped it, that made you warm, you carried it, that made you warm, and then you lit it on fire and that made the house warm. So, it warmed you 3 times. And I think the process, we always think, oh, let's just turn on the oil burner. And that's what I do now, right? I mean, I can afford it. The oil burner can come on, but there's something missing from having just handmade. And with our films, they're still handmade regardless of the technology. And that's that may not be for anybody. I don't have anything pejorative to say about anybody who does it any different way. You just have to find your own way. And the most important thing is, of course, to not be prisoners of technology, to not be prisoners of expectation, to not be prisoners of, in the case of our profession, your profession, historiography, the particular fashion that says it's Marxist economic, or it's Freudian, or it's deconstruction, or it's semiotics, or it's queer studies, or it's Afrocentrism, or it's 1619 or 17. I mean, you just have to liberate yourself and remember you're an umpire calling balls and strikes.
My last question. What does Ken Burns watch for fun and or read for fun?
So I don't have much reading time because my day is spent reading when I'm working. I do crossword puzzles. I've been doing that for a long time. I'm a fanatic in crossword puzzles. I watch, I think, probably news, sports, and movies kind of in equal portions on the thing. But I can get sucked into my youngest kid about 4 years ago when she was 10 or 11, made me watch The Good Place. And I've been dragged kicking and screaming to it. And it was just fantastic. And I did the podcast with Ted Danson the other day. And I just said, man, that was just the greatest thing ever. And my baby, dragged me to it, so I love sports, particularly baseball, the greatest game that's ever been invented. I love football. And I watch a lot of movies. Like usually my TV set is set at Turner Classic Movies and just see
Oh, I love TCM.
what I see what's on TCM first and then move on from there.
Yeah. Ken, thank you so much for taking the time today. This
Oh,
was
Peter.
truly a pleasure.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Peter. Thank you. This is so great. What a wonderful podcast you have. It's great. I'm just honored to be able to hang out with you for a while.
Next Friday on the Conversation Series, David Chaffetz, an independent scholar with a passion for Middle Eastern and Inner Asian history.
The reason why I wasn't very comfortable with the implied explanation of the Silk Road is that the Silk Road suggests that there are luxury products, mainly Chinese, which have to be transferred from one group of rich people in one part of Europe, Asia, to another group of people in Eurasia who are also rich. And everything in between is just sort of a blank space with people we don't care about who never contributed anything to civilization. It turns out that this space between China and, let's say, the Middle East or Europe was a very vibrant space, but it turns out to have been terribly important economically, socially, culturally. There was the basin for a lot of world religions to kind of travel across Eurasia, including Christianity and Zoroastrianism and Buddhism. And they did this by interchanging not luxury products, but items of everyday consumption and use, including horses and other livestock and other steppe products, if you will. But horses were the most valuable and, in a way, strategically, the most important product that they were moving across the steppe.